communism and the trade union movement. And it noted that the history of the peace movement in Australia was very much a history of cooperation between Christians and members of the Labour movement, very often communists and socialists. And only the other day, Lynn made some very kind and gracious remarks about the great Brian Medlin in this vein. And so, having said that, I'd like to welcome Lynn to the podium.
Thank you very much, David. And yes, you mentioned my speech about Brian Medlin. It was last Thursday, and I was a part of the launching of a book of some of his lectures, some of his poems, and other memorabilia about Brian. And of course, here we are on the day of the launch of this book, of the 50th anniversary conference that we held last year. And Brian was a very key part of that movement. We're launching this book today, and it's really been very well done. Congratulations, Don and Lynn and all the others who were involved in putting this together. It captures that day very well. It captures the what was said. The photographs are really a good reflection of what took place. But the question sits in my mind, why do we do such things? Do we do them to have a memory? What we did then, what did we do? Or do we do it for bigger reasons than that? Reasons of what did we learn from all that? What does that teach us about us as human beings and the world in which we live? Now, one of the things that stands out to me as I look through photographs there are the photographs of thousands of people. So many thousands that they get a bit anonymous, really. I mean, there's some more obvious ones. Brian and myself being arrested are in there, right full front, so you can sort of see our faces very clearly. But there's a lot of other people who were the bulk of the anti-war movement at the time. And I think one of the things that I feel I learned, and I hope we all learn, is that a people's movement is so incredibly strong. A people's movement is something that can actually make changes. But a people's movement is made up of people. And so coming back to Brian Medlin, can I just mention one person who, in an earlier book where Brian, his letters with Iris Murdoch are reprinted, he had this exchange, an amazing exchange with Iris Murdoch over a number of years. He doesn't actually make much reference to the anti-war movement in that correspondence until you come across this one reference to a guy who was actually not in the photographs in the book, but he was here, one of the photographs of Leo Davis last year. And I can understand why it's not in the book, because it really isn't of the huge active things happening. But there's this one guy walking up to another guy, the other guy being John Fleming. You might remember him if he happened to be at the demonstration too. He actually was against the war. But the guy who's walking up to him to shake his hand is Bill Ivey. And I see some of you will nod your head. This is what Brian Medlin wrote about Bill Ivey. Bill Ivey was a beautiful bloke, a truly lovely man, a good mate, a staunch comrade, and we all loved him. Bill was no aspiring MP with his nose pressed to the cabinet room window. I hope Brian wasn't making reference to me there. No respectable figure with a reputation for grovelling to preserve. He was no fiery activist, leftier than thou and desperate to inflame a following. No book-bound intellectual keen to prove his point, though the world should perish for it. And strikingly, he was no self-indulgent sentimentalist doing good by feeling bad. He was a toiler, radical, militant and judicious, a wise and simple man, an old broken hillite, a tough-minded bushy, an embattled miner, a free fossicker of and for the working class. He saw the issues and saw nothing else, and so he saw them clearly. And yet he was no fanatic either, no heartless zealot for an abstract cause or builder of mere systems. He hated oppression, not for the sake of hatred, not so that he could ride on it and some personal glory. He hated oppression because he loved people. Altogether, Bill was an extraordinary man, the ordinary bloke, but on an heroic scale. Now, I wanted to read that today because he meant a huge amount to me, and I know others feel the same. But I also wanted to read it today because I actually felt that that was at the heart of so much of what takes place in mass movements. Thank you for the talk about Port Adelaide. I can recall being part of the commemorative 50-year march from Port Adelaide in 1982, I think it was, the Beef March. And we walked up from Port Adelaide. And remembering that massive solidarity experience that took place in 1932 at a time of great need. Well, in the anti-war movement, we saw something similar of that taking place around the country. But I want to argue particularly in South Australia. If you read the papers that were given on that day last September, from Mike or from Bill or Judy or Greg or myself, one of the things that comes out is that there was this broad front, and you made reference to this, David, a moment ago, that people would come together and share a passion for a cause, not for self-interest. It was not done for any personal promotion. It was done because we felt there was something wrong, and we knew there was something wrong, that the news we were getting, and I hate to use this phrase because it was so cheapened in the last 4 years, was fake news. And that we were not being told the truth. And that people were dying because of that not being told the truth. Last week at that launch of Brian's book, Edward Nowak was there. Edward Nowak is a cousin, or was the cousin, of Errol Nowak. And Errol Nowak was the first conscript to die in Vietnam as a result of the war. The first to pay the price for the fake news of the bogus Gulf of Tonkin incident. The first to pay the price for the conscripts, I mean others paid the price too, but the first of the conscripts who had been conscripted to go overseas to fight an unjust war. A war that we have been told lies about, and which ultimately, even then, and I make this point in my paper, even then the powers that be knew we would lose. I quote in my talk that I gave last September that Max Hastings, in his book, his encyclopedic work, Vietnam, talks about the fact that in 1965, Pentagon and CIA officials were exchanging papers about the fact that the best we can do is work out how we get out of here in 10 years' time, because we will not win that war. 1965. 1965, just before the federal election of 1966, December 1966, when the Labour Party, to its great credit, had the courage to take on that fight when the whole stirring up of national emotion meant it got smashed. And Arthur Caldwell had the courage to be a voice against that, believing that sometimes you have to do those things, even if you are going to lose. But by taking that stance when the others believed the lies that were being told, it gave a chance to erode away of the lies, provided it could be done by a constant effort. And here in South Australia, there was the amazing effort that was done by so many different people. And you were all, many of you, were all part of that experience. And so for my part, to have played a part in being there was one of the great privileges of my life. Last September, there were a number of displays, and one of the displays was of photographs of ASIO minutes of meetings. And one meeting, they were held at the AGWA Hall. If you remember the old AGWA Hall in Franklin Street, Jim Thompson was the secretary of the AGWA before he got shafted in the middle of a coup over there some years later. But he would let us have this hall, and we would meet there, and Greg, you'll remember, they were stormy meetings. We would have a couple of hundred people attending there. And, I have to say that different factions of all sorts of views played out very, very vocally. And in the meeting you would have this broad cross-section of society all sitting in this meeting. I had the hapless job to chair those meetings. The ASIO file that names a number of us at being in that meeting but ends at the end of his commentary about the meeting saying, the acoustics of the AGWA hall were not very good. And it was a boisterous meeting, so I didn't catch everything that was said. It was a boisterous meeting. One of the things I was very appreciative. I was 21 at the time and feeling out of my depth up there chairing this rowdy meeting. At the end of the meeting, Clyde Cameron came up to me and said, well shared, laddie. And I loved him ever since. Because I can't for 1 minute say it was well shared. But what was the strength of that meeting and the meetings like it? Albeit that they ended up making some decisions that perhaps were not the wisest decisions in some contexts, but in others they were that they proved the fact that everybody had a right to be a part of the process. And it was so genuinely a people's movement that took place. And that, in the end, changed broader opinion. In '69 in South Australia, we had the biggest swing back to the Labor Party of any state. So much so, Stormy Norman got swept into Parliament. Unfortunately, that ebbed a bit in '72 and he lost his seat. But here in this state, which had been the most pro-war in '66 by polling and by the election result, in '69 was the most against the war by polling and by the election result. A people's movement, surely that shows the power of these things to happen. This meeting is taking place about 2 weeks earlier than I would have liked it to have taken place. The reason being that I thought I'd apply for my own ASIO file. And I applied in February last year and never heard another thing until 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I got a thing saying, yes, they're prepared to release redacted files to me, and if I pay $100. And so I'm going to get apparently between 50 and 100 pages of my activities over the years. So I'll be interested to see what they say then about what was taking place over the thing. But in the end, that will just be a commentary from a perspective, a very biased perspective, quite clearly, about what took place. What we need to ask ourselves, the question is, not only what do we remember, what did we do, and have fond memories of that, but more importantly, what did we learn? Have we ever been able to replicate that degree of getting together broad popular opinion about things that really matter? There have been some episodes of that. Unfortunately, they weren't able to be sustained because they were themselves victims of even more sophisticated fake media manipulation. Take the case of the Iraq, the Second Gulf War, as a key case in point. But what are we doing in terms of trying to keep the doors open across those who are of like mind on important key issues? Can we learn the lessons of success of the 1960s and early 1970s? Or are we prepared simply to say they were great days? Let's look back on them fondly. If that's what they are, well, that's nice. But that's not enough. Let it be more. So, David, with those comments, I'm really happy to be here today to launch, and I've already bought 5 copies. And can I encourage the rest of you to do the same, because it's an important compilation of material. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lynn, for those very pertinent remarks. I might just respond to them very, very briefly in a slightly autobiographic way. My research is about the assassination of an analyst in South Australia in 1942, but he had an industrial history. He'd worked as a cane cutter up in North Queensland, and I learned that an interview had been done with Bill Ivey about his time in North Queensland. Unfortunately, the interview has been lost.
Oh no.
But definitely I'll be following up anything I can about Bill Ivey in North Queensland.
Yeah, fantastic.
It's now my pleasant duty to speak to the wonderful work of editing that's been done by Don and Lynn Longo, and to point out to you that there's a little editorial note which needs to come forward, which will help you get the most out of your copies.
This is the most important part of the entire day. Perfect binding, I am told, is not perfect. So should you have already purchased a book or be going to, make sure that before you launch into it, that you check the crease here, open carefully, crease it well, back and front, and then enjoy your read without any problems. And perhaps ask that they change the name to Almost Perfect. Thank you.
We now have an announcement from Alison Merchant.
When we came in this afternoon, there was a group meeting downstairs, so being nosy, I poked my head in to find out what was going on, and we've made a connection. Unfortunately, I've only got one copy of this, which I will give to Doug, and he will send out the details during the week. I'll just read it out. I haven't had a chance to get too familiar with it. It's Spirit Woman. Launch of the first public commemoration to the victims and survivors of domestic and family violence. There are over 1,700 commemorations to war in South Australia, but up until now, none have been dedicated to those who have died or suffered from domestic and family violence. We've changed that. The Ripples Across South Australia Rotary Park launch is a first of its kind space to publicly acknowledge the impact and ongoing trauma of domestic and family violence in our community and to pay tribute to the many lives lost. We invite you to join us at Rotary Park Ripples launch. All are welcome. The details, which we'll post out to you, May the 14th, 10:30 to 12 o'clock, Rotary Park, Christie's Beach. So I would encourage all of you to attend, and we will have the details out to you next week. Thank you.
Finally, we have the movement of the vote of thanks by Derek Burke.
Thanks, David. On behalf of the Vietnam War Moratorium Anniversary Committee, I would like to thank Lynn Arnold for his generosity and willingness to participate in the 50th anniversary Vietnam Moratorium events that we have organised. The public event last year in September, and today's book launch of Moratorium Now. Anyone looking at Lynn's personal history would straight away see he's a person of high conviction and altruism. His concern for humanity and devotion to social justice causes is without doubt. He is a rare breed. In his short time as a politician, one couldn't accuse him of being a self-serving careerist. After his political stint, he never went to the dark side, coveting sinecures of corporate directorships, consultancies, and other handouts that we see most politicians salivate for. He has kept the fire in the belly of those moratorium days 50 years ago and continues to support the cause of peace and social justice. Lynn, you are a true peace fighter and a liberator for human rights. I don't normally draw on religious ritual, however this time I'm going to make an exception. I think I can say on behalf of everyone here, Lynn Arnold, we genuflect to you for your noble role you have played in society and hope you continue to do so. I would also like to thank Labor History for joining forces with IPAN to organise the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam Moratorium. In particular, Doug Melbourne, Greg Stevens and David Faber. It is a good example of progressive forces united for the people's cause. Building a united front is just as imperative now as it was 50 years ago, for we are in the midst of a new Cold War which could easily break out into a dreaded hot war. Special thanks must go to Lynn and Don Longo for their superb and steadfast editorial work on the Moratorium Now book. Without them, the book would never have happened. Your work is sincerely appreciated. Finally, I'd like to bring to your attention IPAN's People's Inquiry on the cost and consequences of the US alliance. IPAN is seeking out from the Australian community submissions on this issue. The hope is to bring the concerns about this alliance to the Australian people. David Faber has submitted an audio submission, and Lynn Arnold will be doing one on the global militarisation and its impact on the environment and climate change. Maybe Labor History might consider doing a submission on how war affects the working class, or how the Labour movement has opposed imperial alliances and their predilection for aggressive wars. I'll distribute the People's Inquiry handouts to you, so please consider. Thank you.
Yeah.